set it so that Zach is, thank you. Can we set the, so that Zach is the main photo? How do we do that, Bianca? We want to be able to see, spotlight Zach.
That's a great question. You can do it, I think, on your personal screens if you go to the view on the top right-hand side. I'm not sure if I can set it, but if somebody does know the instructions on how to set it, please pop it in the chat and then I'll follow said instructions.
Okay, I've just pinned him for me. So I found Zach's picture and I've just go to the little 3 dots and I've pinned him. So now I'm seeing you, Zach. Lovely to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, that's good. That's the first thing that I need everybody to know.
Glad you got the internet working and
yes,
all of that.
Yeah. Of course, the internet goes out 15 minutes before a virtual talk.
That's okay. You made it just in the nick of time, which is awesome. And yeah. I've kind of said to everybody, I'm going to try not to like fangirl and gush too much because I am a huge fan of Zach's. I've been following him on LinkedIn for a couple of years now. And Zach's book, The Invisible Leader, is one of my absolute favorite books. And I read 50 books a year. So his book is amazing. I highly recommend it. We're just really lucky to have him. So Zach is here with us from Colorado. He works with hundreds of companies, schools, governments all around the world on helping leaders to create positive cultures that enable more meaning, mattering, and motivation, and well-being and performance. Because those things, as we know, are the cornerstone for high performance. We cannot have a sustainable, high-performing organization without having culture. And so I'm just really thrilled to have Zach here with us today. And without further ado, I'll just go ahead and turn over to you, Zach. If you guys have questions while Zach's talking, please put them in the chat, and then we will pick that up in the end. But just put them as they come to your mind, and then we'll gather them up at the end.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the kind words about the book. You never know where this work goes. There's a great saying, a river's source knows nothing of where it touches. And so it's cool to be here with you all. Today, you mentioned performance, Tanya. And today I want to talk about the leading indicator of performance, which is mattering. And the reason why this is titled Mattering comes first is that I get to research what makes life and work meaningful in a place called the Center for Meaning and Purpose. And there is such a thing. And what we find is that before somebody can perform, they first have to feel like they matter. It's almost impossible for anything to matter, even your goals and your projects and your strategic priorities, if someone doesn't first believe that they matter. It's almost impossible for anybody to care until they feel cared for. And let's extend that, right? If we want people to be resilient, they first have to believe their life beyond the struggle is worth it, that they matter. If we want people to have hope, they have to believe that they and their future matters. If we want people to have energy, they have to believe that they matter. And that's why what we find is this hidden leading indicator of all of the things that we say we want seems to be the experience of mattering. Now, you all are in a variety of organizations and practices, and I want to make it clear that the luxury of my job is I don't have to do your job. I get to study how people work, but you are out there doing it, right? And so you're the context expert. I may be the content expert, but you're the context expert. So what I want you to do as you're thinking about what we're going to cover today, I want you to think about how can I activate creating mattering where I am and in the cadence of my own work, my own organization, my own practice, because that's where this is going to come to life. And so over the next 30, 35 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about what the research says about why mattering must come first, what creates a moment of mattering, and then 3 practices that all organizations or cultures and leaders should know how to do to manifest mattering. So let's jump in to why mattering now. Research finds that almost after every financial or economic or societal disruption in history, an existential crisis typically follows. People search for meaning during upheaval events. And now, as you've noticed, the last 2.5 years have brought a major upheaval event. And research is finding that people are increasingly reflecting on the quality of their jobs and of their lives. We've had people in our workforce and society and communities around us that have been told they're essential. And now they're coming back into not only our organizations, they're coming back into our routines and our lives asking, do I feel essential? We have not only health insecurity, but job insecurity. We have the unemployed who may be returning to work. We know one of the biggest risk factors of the unemployed coming back are feelings of uselessness, worthlessness, and insignificance. And then finally, we have rising calls for social justice, rightfully so, and true inclusion. And all of these things can come together for this moment of what could be a meaning deficit without leaders with the skills to create mattering. And a meaning deficit is when we have widespread feelings of uselessness, worthlessness, and insignificant. It's like when the whole world sort of groans this question, why me, why here, why now? And as a community and as leaders, especially in the world of work, where human beings spend upwards of 35% of their unique and irreplaceable lives, we have a unique responsibility to fill that meaning deficit. A lot of people say, Zach, well, people can find meaning in life and then they can come to work and do work. There is no logical dichotomy between work and life. Life occurs wherever somebody is alive. That includes at work. When we say that work is just for work, we're actually saying, people shouldn't be alive here. It doesn't make sense. So mattering creates life-giving environments, and it's the experience of feeling significant to those around us. Now, mattering literally comes first. So biologists and human biologists have found that one of the first things you did as a newborn baby is you didn't search for food. You actually tilted your head upward. We have a survival instinct to look for a caretaker to value you. The first survival instinct we have as a human being is to search to matter to someone else. That seeking system, that survival instinct to matter never goes away. People on your teams, your customers, your clients, whoever works with and for you has that instinct encoded within them, that yearning to matter, to feel valued. And mattering is that belief that we're a significant part of whatever world we're in, whether it's work or life or community. That comes from two things: feeling valued, that primal instinct, but knowing exactly how we add value, knowing that my uniqueness makes a unique impact, that I'm needed here. And when we think about mattering, there are two components, and researchers have teased this out into two sides of mattering. Again, the first is the feeling that I'm valued, and the second is the feeling that I add value. So some practices for creating the feeling that I'm valued. These are things like, my full name. You ask about my life. My struggles. Personal details about me. Details about my work, and you check in on me. You remember me when I'm gone. You miss me. Now, you may be looking at this being like, hey, Zach, what the heck? This is common sense. But how many of these things are on your to-do list today? Pull out your to-do list right now and look at it. How many of these things made it? Or do you know your delivery driver's last name? Or your coffee barista, what their hopes and dreams and goals are? Or have you checked in with your assistant on how their parent is doing, who's in the hospital? Or the new sport that their kids have been trying? Do you know your coworkers' kids' names? Do you know what their goals are, what their aspirations are? What kind of impact do they want to make? Can you name each of your coworkers' unique strengths and what sets them apart as the irreplaceable human beings that they are, right? Oftentimes what happens, and myself included, is common sense is not always common practice. I'm the best person in the world when I'm out walking my dog. I have all these great thoughts like, I'm going to thank this person. I'm going to reach out to this person. I'm going to write this person a letter. And then what happens? I get back to my desk and I get a to-do list in front of me and I just jump back into the routine. Creating mattering is the deliberate action and strategic practice of these things. So I'm valued, and then I add value. You show me the difference that I make. You affirm my unique gifts. You ask for my opinion. You give me responsibility, and you show me that I'm relied on. There's also a big difference between a leader telling someone that they matter, which every company does with "you're our greatest asset" message, even though they're listed as an expense on the budget. But they say that all the time, right? But great leaders don't just tell people that they matter. They show people exactly how they matter. And that's a skill set. And so common sense is usually not common practice. This idea that it's common sense or intuition to treat people well is actually the biggest danger to treating people well. Only when we turn intuition into a common scalable practice does it become widespread. And how do we know it's not widespread? Many of you, especially if you're following news here from the US, have heard the term the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation is essentially people have been leaving their jobs at record pace. But here's what's interesting. In hindsight, when we look at the last 2.5 years of research, our labor market participation is just as high as it was pre-pandemic. So it wasn't the Great Resignation from work. It was people were leaving dehumanizing organizations. An interesting research out of MIT found that toxic culture, feeling undervalued, disrespected, non-included, that should ring a bell, anti-mattering, is 10 times more likely to predict someone leaving after reviewing 34 million employee profiles over the Great Resignation than was pay, benefits, and flexibility of work. Everybody's saying that people want flexibility. Everybody's saying that people want better pay and better benefits. They do, but they're demanding dignity. This has not been the Great Resignation. It's been the demand for dignity. And people are no longer willing to give up an extra dollar or whatever your currency is on the hour for just an extra, to give up their humanity for an extra dollar on the hour. And what we also find is that no recognition or unnoticed performance, these things, failure to recognize contributions, predict someone leaving almost 3 times more than pay, benefits, compensation, flexibility of work. You'll see some things on here that are interesting: job security and reorganization. Obviously, if I lose my job, that's why I'm leaving. Or high levels of innovation. That's when the organization's putting too much pressure on us to change too fast, and I'm overloaded and I'm burnt out. And then poor response to COVID below. But researchers were very surprised by this because they expected flexibility of work to be one of the top, and it simply wasn't. McKinsey found similar findings. On the percentage of top reasons why people left without another job in hand, researchers found that one of the number one commonalities in the top responses was uncaring leaders, lack of career development, advancement potential, and then lack of meaningful work, feeling like what I'm doing is positive, purposeful, and significant. Now, do I think that their leaders, the respondents' leaders, were actually uncaring? Like they wake up and be like, I'm going to not care for my people today? Probably not, right? But the perception, the feeling that there aren't things happening around me that show me that I'm cared for represents a gap in the skills to create mattering, that this common sense idea of being a good human isn't necessarily common sense. And then a decade of survey research has found almost 65% of workers around the world feel underappreciated or undervalued. Almost 67% of workers in a global survey indicate that they weren't meaningfully recognized once in the last 12 months. And then almost 80% of employees who leave their jobs, again, and this was pre-pandemic, indicate that a lack of appreciation was one of the major reasons why they left. And that tracks to what we're seeing now with what happened during the Great Resignation. But here's the gap, right? Here's the tension. We also know in global surveys that over 80% of people indicate that experiencing meaningfulness, experiencing that I matter and that what I do matters, is a daily top priority. And it's also not a generational preference. Like if I were to take everybody on this call, even though you're from all around the world, all different generations, and I were to say, raise your hand if you'd prefer to feel insignificant at work, raise your hand, right? Nobody would be like, yeah, me, right? It's a universal human desire. It's not a generational preference. How we talk about it may be different, but it's not necessarily specific to a generation, specific to human beings. So as we think about mattering and how it connects to the things that we say we care about, it's really important to recognize that a lot of the things we've been measuring in organizations, engagement, motivation, performance, are lagging indicators. A research since the 1970s indicate the psychological condition of meaningfulness, I and what I do matters, my work is positive, purposeful, and significant, is a key predictor of engagement, right? I'm not going to attach my emotions to something, which is engagement, unless I feel like my emotions are worth attaching it to this thing or this organization. I'm not going to give my energy unless I feel like my energy is worth something, right? I'm not going to find my purpose or my contribution until I believe I have something to contribute. I'm not going to use my strengths until I believe I have strengths and that I'm needed and I matter. And then satisfaction, which is I can look back on my day and say, oh, that was good. My job is good. And we know all of those things come together to promote fulfillment in work, which results in things like performance, speed, innovation. And what I've been seeing is that great leaders and great organizations measure, prioritize, and make sure all leaders have the skills to create the conditions for the leading indicators of the things that they want versus trying to get people more engaged, trying to get people more motivated, and trying to get people to feel satisfied when they don't yet feel like they matter. So the practices we're going to go over today are also practices to help you focus on the leading indicators of all of these amazing things that we want in organizations. So what I want you to do is, as we move into the practices, I just want you to think about the moment in your work when you most felt like you mattered to somebody else. So when you most felt like you mattered to somebody else. And what I'd love for you to do is I'd love for you to think about that moment, but then type into the chat 1 or 2 words that describe what that person did to help you feel like you mattered. So think about the time in your work when you most felt like you mattered to someone else. And what did that person do to help you feel like you mattered? So take a minute just to reflect on this. I find it helps to bring this to our mind personally before we dive into any best practices. Thanks, Phil. That was really fast. Recognized me for a strength. That's really important. The specific naming of a unique gift that we bring is incredibly powerful. What else? Please and thank you. Being thanked, right? Being shown gratitude for your presence. Listened, feeling heard. I was just doing an interview for a research project, and somebody said that feelings of anti-mattering, the opposite of this, felt like being in a room and yelling and nobody listening or paying attention. That's what the opposite of mattering feel like. So feeling heard makes sense there. Giving a shout out in front of everybody and recognizing someone as a customer hero of the week. Losing a family member, saying take the time you need as you were grieving. So noticing that you were losing a family member and actually taking a proactive action to help. This is really important. There's a big difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is understanding what someone's going through. Compassion is offering a proactive action to alleviate suffering someone's going through. Compassion is empathy plus action. Thanking, checking in on people, good. Positive feedback, appreciation for the effort. See, you all could be social scientists because you're human beings. And what we know creates mattering from the research are 3 major practice areas. One is people who experience mattering feel noticed. That means people make eye contact with them. They show an interest in them. And as many of you said, they remember personal details and they check in. We also know that people who experience mattering feel affirmed, that people around us can know and name our unique gifts, and then they show us how those gifts make a unique impact on our work or organization around us. And then the final one is needed. When people feel replaceable, they will act replaceable, right? But when people feel irreplaceable, they will act irreplaceable. A lot of people have this mindset, especially in the world of work, and it's been going on for the last 50 years, where they say, oh, don't think you're not replaceable. That's actually a defense mechanism, in my opinion, to abdicate the responsibility to create mattering for those around you. No human beings are replaceable. Every human being is an irreplaceable, indispensable human being. And that's at the core of dignity in work. So feeling needed, feeling relied on, feeling irreplaceable, feeling indispensable as a human being. Skills may be replaceable, but people are not replaceable. So noticed, affirmed, and needed. A great way to remember these practice areas is NaN means not a number when we're coding computer data. So that's how I remember it. Am I making sure people feel noticed, affirmed, and needed? So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the remainder of our time. I'm going to go through some best practices in each of these areas. And as we're going through this, I just want you to think about, again, where, when, and how can you implement these? in your own cadence of your organization or your practice. And then we'll leave some time for questions and discussion. So let's jump in for the first practice area, and keep reading the chat, because I think it's really powerful to see some of this practice spotting amongst people here of what creates a moment of mattering. But let's jump into the first practice here, which is noticing others. And one of the stories that shows the power of a moment of noticing and a moment of mattering comes from some of the research that we did with university janitors. And we embedded ourselves with a group of cleaners for a year and a half and tried to understand what made work meaningful for people. And this is Ellen. She's a janitor at Colorado State University, where I do my research. And I asked her, what's most meaningful about your work? And she looked at me and she started describing the moment that she cleans the university dormitory bathrooms on a Monday morning after the weekend. Okay, think about this. University students after the weekend, Monday morning bathrooms, not very pleasant, right? But what we often find is that purpose isn't always pleasurable, and people who experience mattering can see their purpose even in the unpleasurable. And so we asked Ellen, I said, tell me more about that. That's surprising. Why is that most meaningful to you? And she goes, well, it's the part of my job I dislike the most. But every time I go into that bathroom, I say to myself, I'm cleaning this bathroom so that these kids don't get sick. People who feel like they matter have a so that mentality. They're able to link what they're doing with its inevitable impact. You'll also notice that Ellen has hats that she crochets. She crochets winter hats. It gets cold here in Colorado in the winter. And she crochets hats for all of the students in the dormitory that she's cleaning, so that when she goes to her car, she will be reminded of why her job exists if she sees just one student wearing a hat, she told me. Now, she's been at the university for over 25 years, one of the most sought after janitors. But this is how she started. And this is the power of noticing. She started by being miserable, by lamenting the fact that she was a janitor. She said that she was near homelessness. This was the only job that would hire her. And when she got this job, she spent the first week telling herself, I wish I could have done something more with my life. Why am I just a janitor? How do you go from I'm just a janitor to I'm cleaning this bathroom so that these kids don't get sick? She told me it was one supervisor who noticed that she was struggling, brought her into a break room, got out a dictionary, and defined the word custodian for her as a person responsible for looking after a building and everyone in it. And she said that that was the first time in her life where somebody showed her she was worthy of responsibility. So this supervisor noticed that she was struggling, but not only that, they affirmed her responsibility and showed her that she was needed. She said it changed her belief systems about herself and her life and completely changed her narrative. And those moments of being noticed, those moments of mattering can increase self-worth and motivation. Research finds they increase serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine. These are the neurotransmitters that control for mood, movement, and motivation. They lower our risk of depression. They can lower anxiety. They can lower stress. And it's not surprising. One of my favorite scientists, Dr. Ellen Langer at Harvard, did a study with nursing home residents who were all split up into two very large groups, and they were all nearing end of life. They were 75 or older, and she controlled for genetic predispositions. She controlled for potential early mortality indicators and variables. And she had these two groups of nursing home residents, and she wanted to know what would happen if she gave one of them a plant and told them that your job is to keep this house plant alive. And the other group, she continued to monitor them as usual. What was powerful is that after 18 months, twice as many residents who were tasked with keeping a plant alive were alive after 18 months in the control group. Twice as many, right? That feeling of that you are seen, you are needed, even by a plant to take care of, had this amazing effect on people. We don't exactly know why or how, but this has been replicated, that when people feel like they're needed, when they have responsibility, they thrive. Now, just as powerful as those moments are the power of the opposite of that, which is anti-mattering. I'll give you an example. I went to work with a group of window washers, and the supervisor told me, these people are unmotivated. You need to go motivate them. I almost always find that most motivation issues in organizations are not motivation issues, they're anti-mattering issues. Because often feelings of invisibility result in acts of desperation. And this group was kind of revolting because they didn't feel noticed and they didn't feel like their voice was heard. And so I went down to this group and I just said, hey, if you were running this place, what would you do? And let me tell you, I did not see a disengaged or unmotivated group. They all had plenty of ideas, but their voices weren't seen and invited. But one woman said, I've been coming here for 5 years, and one of the first things I do every day is clean the bottom floor windows of this industrial complex that we were in having this meeting. And she says at 3 p.m. every afternoon, the sprinkler system comes on and splashes the windows with watermarks. And then every morning I have to come clean that avoidable mess. She said, in my first week on my job, I went to my supervisor. I was really excited. I say, hey, I have an idea. Let's aim the sprinklers differently. And the supervisor said, that's not our problem. That's the sprinkler people's problem. I need you to just do your job. She said that for the next 5 years, she started her job every day doing an avoidable task. She said her voice wasn't noticed. It wasn't heard. And she said, it makes me feel like I'm worthless. Why do I bother? She also said, I feel completely pointless as a person. When we interview people that experience these little moments of not being noticed or having their voice heard, they say things like, it's deflating, it's depleting. Like that interviewee we just did an interview with today said, I'm in a room shouting and no one's listening to me. Some people have described it as feeling like I'm in a hole that I can't get out of. And what happens is that you may be sitting here being like, these supervisors are terrible at the window washing place. You're probably right, but also all of our teams and organizations and our societies and our communities have sprinkler problems. There's these little things that may make people feel like their jobs, their tasks, their voice are not noticed, that they're futile. And that sense of futility and helplessness is the enemy of meaningfulness. And so the two things to keep in mind are when someone doesn't believe that they matter, it's easy for nothing to matter. But what's powerful is this is a leadership practice that we can learn. So how do we make sure people feel noticed and how we make people feel seen? And that's that first practice area. A key thing to remember is there's a difference between noticing somebody and knowing somebody. So, right, you can know your best friend, but not notice that they're struggling or suffering. Noticing is a deliberate act of thinking about, remembering, and checking in on people's personal details or work details. And one of my favorite stories to show you the practice of noticing and to break it down comes from a 5-year-old boy who's growing up in Brooklyn. He was the son of a single mom, and his mom didn't have childcare, so she would drop him off at the library in Brooklyn, New York City, and leave him there for the day, then pick him up at the end of the day. And this young boy said that they didn't have much money, and he had one toy, which was a deck of playing cards that he shuffled and would just bring and look at. And after a week of going there, the boy said that the librarian came up to him and said, hey, I've noticed that you've come here with this deck of playing cards every day. We just got a book this weekend on how to do a card trick. Would you like it? And she sat with him and went through this book on how to do a card trick. And he said that he learned the card trick with her. He showed his mom when his mom picked him up, and she smiled so big. He said it's the biggest she smiled in months. And he got addicted to that feeling. And he went back into the library the next week, and the librarian brought him a Houdini book on how to do illusions. And that young boy grew up to be David Blaine, who is the world-renowned illusionist and magician. And he said in an interview, if it wasn't for that librarian noticing him, he would have never discovered his passion. He would have never discovered that he mattered, that he had worth. And what's powerful about that is that it's not just relegated to an inspiring story like that. In our interviews with people, we find that one moment of being noticed can change the trajectory of our careers or our lives. And not only can it change the trajectory of our careers and our lives, but it helps us to remember that we're seen by someone else. And there's nothing more powerful than feeling seen. And let's break down the practice of that librarian, the leadership practice. So the librarian noticed something unique about him, thought about him when he wasn't there, and then deliberately did an action to show him he was thought about. Those are the three practices of noticing somebody, seeing someone's personal details. It's not just someone's personal details. It could be what they might be going through at work. Thinking about that person when you're not there, and then scheduling a time and doing something, making a point to go and show somebody that they're thought about, and doing that repeatedly. Not only can it empower individuals, it can galvanize teams. This is Ernest Shackleton's expedition in 1915 to Antarctica. One of the only expeditions during that time that didn't lose a single crew member. These were very dangerous expeditions. And Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, got stuck in a block of sea ice. And it was almost certain death for at least half of this crew. And they had limited food stores, and their ship was being slowly crushed in the sea ice behind them. Now, if I was a leader during that time, I would have probably given some inspiring speech to get everybody through. But when we look at the diaries of what Shackleton did, he did the opposite. He actually stopped and took the time to notice and have conversations with each crew member. In fact, he made sure that everybody still felt a sense of purpose, and he would go up and scrub the decks of this ship that was being crushed with the people who were responsible for scrubbing the decks. He would talk to the scientists about their science. He would talk to the navigators about the navigation. He wanted them to feel a sense of purpose. So he came to know them and was interested in what they were interested in. The second thing that he did is he had big banquets and pulled out all of these stores of food to celebrate if it was someone's birthday, or if it was a holiday that they were missing back home, or even a spouse's or partner's birthday back home that they were missing. He would bring out these big stores of food and have these big banquets. He even had an 11-person tackle football game on the ice because he knew that his crew liked American football. And so when his crew was stuck on Elephant Island and he had to sail for 4 months to go get help, he came back, and one of the first things he did, researchers found, is he checked in with each individual team member again and how they were doing. And one of the diaries during that time said that those were the happiest years of my life, being stuck on the sea ice because of this leader. When we see people, when we notice people, when we take an interest in people's interests, they will buy in, they'll commit, they'll emotionally attach themselves to what we're doing. So a couple of practices to remember to think about if they're scaled amongst the leadership in your organization. One is to make eye contact and create the space. This means to create the space to authentically check in with people before you jump into what you have to do with people. So oftentimes I observe team meetings, and what happens is at the beginning of the call, people will just jump into the agenda. Or they'll go around and do a check-in and people will say, oh, I'm overloaded. And someone will be like, oh, I'm really stressed right now. And then they'll be like, okay, let's just jump into the agenda, right? Creating space is giving people the time to discuss and share how they are before you get into what you have to do. So where, when, and how can you create more of that space? I'll give you a couple of tips in just a moment. Ask about, remember, and check in on people's personal details. This is a deliberate practice. One of the most inspiring leaders I work with was actually a distribution center manager. And she had a team of 19 people. And I asked her team, I said, you know, what keeps you going? And they said, oh, it's just our leader. She gets us. We'd do anything for her. And I went to her and I said, what do you do? And she goes, one thing. I have one practice. On Friday afternoons, I take out this notebook and I write down one personal thing I heard one of my team members talk about. I write down their name and write down one personal thing, whether their kid's starting a new sport, whether they were struggling with a project last week, whether they were sick or their parent was in the hospital. And then on Monday morning, I start my day by reading that list of names and those personal details. And I schedule a 3-minute conversation with each of them that week to ask them about it. Scheduled. What I love about it is that common sense becomes common practice. You don't have to keep a log of your team members' stuff, but what is your deliberate practice for making sure people feel seen? What is that for you? And, you know, I always say this in my head to myself: schedule your good intentions. When you're out on that walk and you want to say thank you, make sure the good intention makes it to your calendar. Just that can make a difference. The other piece is practicing compassion. We mentioned this. There's a difference between empathy and compassion. If you notice that someone's struggling, offer an action, however imperfect, to help. An example is I saw a leader I was coaching. His whole team was on this Zoom call. I was very proud of him because one of the people on the Zoom call said they were very overloaded. And instantly he said, hey, you know that standing meeting we have on Friday? Would you like to take that off and get caught up? All of a sudden, what happened? Nonverbals relaxed. Compassion, notice others' moods, inquire, and offer to do something to help. Ask people for their opinion, their voice, and appreciate small everyday acts. So a couple of the easiest to implement practices are: one, asking better questions. Instead of how are you, or whatever your greeting is, that's more general, ask questions that people can actually answer. If someone asks me, how are you? I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old right now. I can't really answer that question. How am I at any given point of the day? It's too big of a question for our brains. So all you ever get usually is good, you. I'm doing okay, you. And that doesn't really help us to see people as leaders. So here are some of my favorite reframes. If someone asks me what has my attention right now, I can answer you, definitely. If someone asks me what kind of day have I had right now, I can answer you. If someone asks, what do you need help with today? And how can I help? I can definitely answer you. Or if someone asks me what's been most meaningful to you today, I can answer you. So instead of asking, how are you? Or whatever question you ask that you're just not getting a lot of data from about your people, ask things that people can answer and reframe. What are some questions that you might be able to reframe for people just to help them feel more seen? And so you have some more of that data to implement personal check-ins. Another one of the best researched practices is to do some sort of check-in on how people are doing. So one of my favorites is a green, yellow, red check-in. So this means at the beginning of a meeting, maybe once a week, you go around and you have each person say whether they're green, yellow, red. Green is I'm doing great, I'm in flow, I feel good. Yellow is I'm a little reactionary, fight or flight is present, and red means I'm offline. No, nervous system is shutting down, I'm stressed. Your job as a leader is not to psychoanalyze them and change their color, which is tempting. Your job is to simply let people be aware of what's going on. Here's the magic. If you go around and say, hey, I'm a yellow right now, if I go around and Tanya says that she's a red, do you think that I'm going to argue and debate Tanya about a project today in that meeting if she's a red? Probably not. Do you think that if I go to get on the next Zoom call with Tanya and we're a little bit early and just her and I are there and I know she's a red, do you think I'm going to just say to myself, I noticed she was a red. I hope she's doing okay. Or am I going to ask, hey, Tanya, how are you doing? Right? What happens when you do this general awareness not only helps people feel seen, it helps develop empathy and awareness of each other's moods on their teams as well. We did this with a group of nurses in an emergency department who start their day at a hospital, who start their day every day, usually saying, what's wrong in every room and how are we going to fix it? They start their weekly huddles, their shift-based huddles that way. What we started doing is doing a 30-second green, yellow, red check-in at the beginning of the huddles. And patient satisfaction went up and employee satisfaction, nurses and engagement went up. And that's the only thing we did. It was a 30-minute intervention. You don't have to do that, but what is a practice that you can take to check in with how people are doing and get a sense of their moods and overall feelings? Once we notice people and really see them for their uniqueness, we can affirm them. And real affirmation is not just saying thank you or good job. Real affirmation is showing people how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. So showing people how what they do matters. One of the best ways to do that is to first make sure people believe that what they do matters. And to do that, put a face to their tasks. Make sure that people know the end human being that whatever they're doing impacts. This is Dr. Turner. He's a radiologist in Israel. He did a really powerful study with over 600 radiologists. He broke them up into 2 groups, each of 300. And he sent them all CT scans to evaluate and send back. But on one of the groups, all he did differently was put the headshot of a patient on the scan. And he wanted to see what would happen to their results. Unbelievably, he found that the radiologists that saw the face, saw the impact of their task while they were doing it, self-reported they spent 80% more time interpreting the scans. They found more incidental findings that would be important to the patient's future prognosis, and they wrote 25% longer interpretive findings on their report than the group that did not see the human being that their work was going to impact. How, when, and where can you collect and tell stories to remind people of the upstream impact of whatever they're doing on human beings? And it's incredibly powerful when we put a face to the task. One of the best ways we can do this is to get better at saying thank you and good job. I think probably everybody on this call says thank you or good job at least once a day. So let's make it a rule for everybody here. If you're going to say thank you or good job to anybody, make sure you go one step further and show them the difference that they make and how they make it. For example, one of the augmented tools that I use, this comes from the world of constructed feedback, and we've altered it to be used in purposeful affirmation, is the SBI model. So anytime you're going to say thank you or good job, make sure you first describe the situation. When and where did it happen? So at the beginning of this Zoom call, when Tanya, it's very clear, all of a sudden I'm a noticer, right? I'm not just the supervisor or leader that says thank you at 1 o'clock every day. I noticed when and where it was. 2, describe the behavior. At the beginning of this Zoom call, when Tanya introduced me, she was very thankful for my book and recognized my book, and was very inspiring with how she handed this session over to me. So inspiring, showed gratitude. That's amazing. And then finally describe the impact. What was the impact on you or others? So for example, at the beginning of this Zoom call today, when Tanya showed gratitude for my book, and she was very inspiring with connecting me to this audience and handing it over to me, I felt really comfortable, even though I had just rebooted my modem 15 times to try to get on the call. And if just one person does one of these practices for someone else today, it's a result of Tanya having me here and introducing me today. So thank you, Tanya. Right? Just that changes how someone feels and gives people the evidence of their significance. Another way you can give people the evidence of their significance is to change how you delegate tasks and projects. Instead of telling somebody what to do and how to do it, make sure you first show them why it matters. Research finds there's 3 components of a meaningful task or project. 1, people have to know the significance to another human being. 2, people have to know how the task identifies with a bigger outcome or something down the line. And then 3, they should be reminded of how they can use their strengths to do it. So for example, if I'm delegating the task to introduce me to Tanya, I might say something like this: hey, Tanya, there's going to be a lot of practices we go over. We want people to pay attention and be energized, because if one person helps someone feel noticed, they can change the trajectory of their careers. And also, like, introducing us helps to create a really cohesive, streamlined session. And you're really inspiring and you're really good at showing gratitude. So I need you to use that tomorrow. Oh, by the way, can you get that done by 1:30? So, right, it's totally different than how we typically delegate, but it helps people believe and see that they matter. And then finally, ask more meaningful questions. Instead of questions like, what do you want to do with your career? Or what do you want to do here? Ask them, what do you want your career to do for others? Because you assume that they matter. Let's ban the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because you ask people to be mystics and predict the future. And you're subtly saying you don't quite matter yet. Instead of that, ask, what kind of impact do you want to have made 5 years from now? What's your ideal job? What problems do you want to solve with your strengths? Right? All of these questions can help reaffirm people. So to recap, know and name others' unique strengths, show others how their strengths make a difference, show people how what they do impacts others and what their work makes possible, and then ask more meaningful questions. And the final practice area today is that when people feel noticed and they feel affirmed, they can start feeling needed. And when someone feels needed, they feel essential. And leaders who create mattering treat everyone like they're essential. Because the truth, and I think that many leaders forgot about until the last 2.5 years, is that when people feel replaceable, they'll act replaceable. And when people feel irreplaceable, they act irreplaceable. I'll give you an example. If I were to ask Tanya, hey, Tanya, do you want to go to this dinner party at my house tomorrow night? And then Tanya wakes up tomorrow morning and she's like, oh man, I really don't feel like going. I said yes, but I don't feel like going. It's pretty easy for Tanya to get out of that. But if I were to like, hey, Tanya, can you come to this dinner party tomorrow night? I need you to bring dessert. And Tanya's like, yeah, I'll go. But then she wakes up tomorrow morning and she's like, I don't really want to go, but Zach needs me to bring dessert. How hard is it to say no? Very hard. When people feel needed, they commit, they show up, they bring their best selves. Human beings are at their best when they feel needed, when they feel relied on. One of the best ways to do this is to connect people and show them how they're indispensable to a meaningful purpose. I love this story from when John F. Kennedy, the US president, was launching the Apollo missions, the moon landing. And he went into a green room that he thought was a green room to give a big speech. And unfortunately, it was a mop closet. And there was some janitors wringing out their mops there. And he went in and just said, hey, what do you do here? And a cleaner very calmly looked at him and said, oh, Mr. President, I'm putting a person on the moon. And then he went back to his work. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania researched how they created that feeling. Think about this management challenge. 300,000 workers across the United States. Most of them were contract workers, trying to accomplish a mission that nobody knew was possible, that was almost 10 or 15 years off. And most of the people that were contracted would not be contracted when the mission was completed. What researchers found that it was in almost every facility during that time, managers had what was called a ladder to the moon, which was a ladder to the moon on these blackboards that showed people how their tasks were indispensable to make tangible, measurable objectives happen, how those objectives made other objectives happen, and then ultimately how their tasks were indispensable to putting a person on the moon by the end of the decade. The janitor very calmly saying, oh, I'm putting a person on the moon, was the result of a deliberate management practice where in the environment, people could see how they were indispensable to a meaningful purpose every single day. This is called laddering. Do the people around you know their ladder to your moon mission? So show people how they are indispensable to your team and to the bigger purpose. Say these 5 words. If you don't remember anything else from this, over the next week, say, if it wasn't for you, to somebody and see what happens. If it wasn't for you, and show them what they make possible. Tell people how you rely on them. Notice when they're gone, show them that they're missed. And then work on making sure that these practices become scaled, right, in an organization. And how does that happen? Well, it happens when people in an organization know the need for mattering, that mattering has to come first, that they're introduced to these skills, but then they're assessed on these skills, self-assessments, and they are assessed and evaluated as leaders on how they measure, how they enable mattering to happen. Make sure your environment is designed to create mattering. Continue to assess the behaviors and feelings of the people who are benefited from this mattering, and then continue this through an organization, because things don't really scale unless they're deliberately measured. So we have about 9-10 minutes or so left today. I would love to open it up for some questions, if that's okay. And feel free to contact me. There is plenty more about this. I could talk for 5 hours about mattering under each of these practices. So if you want any additional materials, just email me and I'll be happy to share them with you. But I'll open it up to questions and turn it back over to Tanya.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was absolutely incredible. We did have one question that came through a little bit earlier, and would the slides be shared if you were able to share those with me?
Sure, yeah. I'll send you a PDF version for sharing.
Nice, thank you. And then everybody who wants the slides, if you go to our event on the LinkedIn page and just comment on there on that event that you want the slides, and then I'll connect with you guys and get the slides emailed to you. So that's awesome.
I'll also send Tanya, I'll send you a self-assessment that people can use to assess themselves as a leader on each of these skill areas under noticed, affirmed, and needed.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you so much. So I just want to start off with one question, and everybody else, please put your questions in the chat so we can get to those as well. But I have a question, the know the need for mattering bit at the top that you've got to do, that leaders need to know that first, right? Sometimes that's the hard bit, is because we might have certain senior leaders that like I'm often accused of being fluffy for this sort of stuff, right? So how do I without getting them to come to your session today, which hopefully a lot of them were because I invited everyone, but how do we do that? How do I help convince them it's not just about delivery and this?
Yeah, I mean, well, the other thing is that mattering is not directional, meaning, I often ask people, do you do this for your leaders? Right? Do you do this for the people above you?
Okay.
Because one of the things that is we often try to rely on people above to do it for us. And if we don't do it for them, then there's probably a lot of defensiveness already.
Okay.
Leadership can be a very lonely role, right? And the other thing is make sure we have empathy, because I work with a lot of executives whose livelihood and their worth is dependent on a quarterly earnings report.
Mm-hmm.
So if my worth was subtly judged by a board on a quarterly earnings report year after year after year, what we reward is who we ultimately become, right? So having some empathy for that there's not a leader not caring about mattering. It's a leader that's been socialized to care about other things.
Right.
So the key is, one of the key questions that I've asked people is, what do you care about? What are the metrics that you care about? And then they'll list them. They'll say performance, they'll say results, money, speed, innovation, all of those things. And then I'll ask them, what one of those is not mediated through a human being? And then they'll say, oh, they all are. And then I say, okay, what do you think would be the optimal state of the human being for those to occur? And what do they say? They say they need to be motivated. They need to feel committed. They need to feel energized. Oh yeah, that's what mattering is.
Okay. I just wrote all that down.
I mean, that's like really, it's for me. And, I have sort of a rational mind. So I study emotional concepts from a rational perspective. And it's really just a biological need. It really is a biological instinct to matter. It's not a fluffy trend or anything. I mean, there's some evolutionary biologists and biologists who have said that the need to matter seems encoded in our genes. Like we wouldn't get up in the morning out of bed if we didn't presume that we mattered.
Yep.
It's the animating force of life.
Right.
It seems to be.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Zach.
Just say that to them. They say it's the animating force of life.
The animating force of life. I'm going to write that down. We have another question from Amanda. So Amanda says, thanks for all the great tips in NAN. How do you see this translate into culture, i.e. others doing this, not just leaders? Yep. Yeah,
that's the peer-to-peer piece. So making sure that peers are doing this for each other, making sure that there's a commitment. We just did a really big engagement with a large organization, multinational organizations, cross-culturally, with over 700 leaders of various units. And we made a commitment saying, we commit to ensuring every employee here feels noticed, affirmed, and needed. And under each noticed, we committed to the behaviors. And then we showed, here's what to do if this is not happening for you. Here's who to contact, how to have this conversation. And then we showed, here's what's expected of you to do this for one another. And then for individuals' performance evaluations, we actually started doing peer-to-peer mattering evaluations, and leaders, it's the core competency of leadership that's tied to other rewards. So incorporating this into what's expected behaviorally is powerful, because it is the foundation. Like a lot of people do values-based assessments, which is great. But again, if you want someone to care about delivering your values, they first need to feel cared for as people. Yeah. And so building this into your competencies and making sure it's expected of people.
Nice.
Oh, and that they know how to do it, because some people, what I find is that they want to do this stuff, but they just don't have some of the practices. Like they may say, I'm just a quieter person, or I don't need to be people's best friend at work.
Yeah.
And they interpersonally may be more introverted. So helping those people in their own way, make sure that they get at the essence of helping someone feel noticed, that's authentic to them, takes some organizational coaching.
Right. Well. Okay. Look, I have so many takeaways. Sorry, dog bark. So I have so many takeaways from this, but one of the big ones was most leaders do care. They do care. They just
Yeah.
don't put it on their to-do list. They just don't schedule in that, right? So that's like
Exactly.
massive takeaway. And like, I know I felt convicted through a lot of that too, because I totally care, but I don't do all that stuff either. So I'm going to start doing that. I'm committing to do it now. And
Yeah.
like we have something else from Andrew. To matter is fundamental human need, but the strategies we choose to have that Zach is describing strategies to help others meet their need and that can be profoundly effective. So yeah, just a comment rather than a question. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
So thank you again so much, Zach. And again, everyone, I put the LinkedIn event link there. And so just comment on that if you would like Zach's PDF of the slides and also the kind of gap analysis, I would say, for this.
Yeah, well, self-assessment. It's just like,
yeah,
how frequently do you do these things?
Yeah.
For yourself, just to know what area comes more naturally to you as a leader, so you can really just see where you want to grow in it and commit to.
Awesome. And I just want to one more time again say how much I really loved the book, The Invisible Leader, Zach's book, and also so do get a copy of that. And follow Zach on LinkedIn. He just drops these jewels of wisdom regularly. And I love that Zach can be a little provocative sometimes when it's needed. And but it's always based in data and research and very well founded. So great to follow him.
If you follow me and disagree, I mean, I post ideas I think will be useful, and trust me, not all of them have been useful for other people, and people have let me know, but that's what's great. So jump in, and I like to stir up dialogue that's real, that helps make people's lives better at work. So, and
I love that, but I've never actually seen anything that you posted that wasn't useful to me personally. But
okay.
But do follow him on LinkedIn, everybody, and pick up a copy of the book because it is life-changing. And again, just thank you so much, Zach, for coming and joining us here in New Zealand. Just something to have on the back of the mind and the radar. We are the Business Agility New Zealand team, sorry about the dogs, is in the beginning stages of talking about doing a conference here. So there might be an opportunity for you to visit New Zealand in the future. So just keep that
That's
in the
cool.
back of
That
your
would be
mind.
great.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy your day. And it was great having you here.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Hey, Zach, can I say something real quick to you?
Oh, please do.
Just we lost a son in our family just about 8 months ago. So my wife is my stepson. My wife, as you would imagine, has gone through all kinds of grieving and continues to grieve. But I'm looking at your model and I'm thinking that is such a critical model for life, right? I know we're talking about work, but I'm looking at that going, being noticed and being affirmed and feeling absolutely needed is absolutely what people who are going through a grieving process also need, because they wake up and they go, what's the point? What, man, why bother now? I've lost, what's the point of life? And I look at this and I go, it's certainly relevant to people who are going through grief. So keep that in mind, because I think that's, I certainly can see some real value in it for us. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and a lot of the research on this was born through studying adolescent depression, actually, depression and anxiety, and that's how the construct of mattering actually came to be in the psychological world.
Yeah,
because it's so essential, and just simple things like noticing, thanks for making me coffee, or like, can really go a long way for people who are questioning worth.
Yeah. Well, I am certainly going to get a copy.
And I'm sorry to hear about the loss.
Thank you. But I'll show it to people that matter to me, because I think it's really important. Yeah. Good. Fantastic work.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah. Thanks, Bianca.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.